Hold on to your butts.
Hang on, we're in for some chops.
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Oh, somebody please think of the children!
Welcome to the DeEducated podcast.
What's up, DeEducated? Welcome to DeEducated podcast. This is episode 6. My name is Chris.
I'm Mark, and I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener.
Because if it were an Oscar Mayer wiener, I don't know what
you ever heard of
the words are.
Have you ever heard of the Mandela effect before?
No, what's that?
So the Mandela effect is, So the Mandela effect is when you remember something a very specific way, but that turns out to be not what it is. And
like beam me up, Scotty.
Like Beam Me Up, Scotty, or Luke, I Am Your Father.
Yep.
Another example. He never actually says that, but everybody remembers it. Oscar Mayer Wiener has the exact same thing. Apparently, the way Meyer is spelled is M-A-Y, but it's actually M-E-Y, or people remember it the other way. I don't know.
Oh, I remembered it as M-E-Y-E-R.
Yeah. Well, you're just from a different timeline.
Yeah, I actually saw an Oscar Mayer wiener. Hey, I also just said that this is episode 6. This is episode 5.
See, I told you you're from a different timeline.
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. Hey, why don't we go right into things? We're going to have a great episode. We're going to be talking with Dr. Jason Zorba, professor on politics and everything else. He's going to be talking about, he's not actually a doctor of everything else.
Of everything else, yeah.
But he is going to be talking to us about Canadian politics in a non-boring way, not the way that you learned it in high school. And he's going to be telling us why we should care about politics and how it actually works. And hopefully we'll be a little bit smarter as voters once we.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk to Jason. He's a great guy personally, and he's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. So, I'm sure it's going to be a great interview. So what did you end up doing this week, Chris?
Well, other than the usual, I got back into rolling in BJJ after the COVID thing. I was just teaching, and I was doing working out. You kind of do the class with the kids, that sort of thing, but I wasn't rolling or sparring. And the two main things that I train in, well, three main things I guess that I train in nowadays are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and karate. However, unlike karate and Muay Thai, I am still a very early level in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I have to focus on it the most. And I hadn't really rolled since we closed. So this week was the first time that I rolled with some other students, and boy, my back is killing me. Not really, it's not that bad, but I can tell that I didn't roll for a couple of months. That's for sure. So that was really great. I think I'm gonna, I really haven't sparred in Muay Thai with any regularity for. It's got to be close to a year now. I come in once in a while, but I think I'm going to start getting back into sparring.
Last September, or just before you and I had our fight night, last September, you were sparring pretty regularly.
But then stopped about maybe 2 months before you and I had our fight night.
Right.
It's been irregular since then. So.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's good. And so go ahead.
Sorry. The other thing I did, I actually made it out to the range 3 times this week. That used to be my standard, but it hasn't been for a while. And I know you hate me because you still haven't got to go out and test your Churchill shotgun. But,
so mad.
I went out once.
I did pick up ammo, so I'm good to go there.
Okay, well, that's good news. I could have just lent you some ammo, but
it's all good.
I went out the first time and I just practiced some remedial drills with handgun. I practiced just like a steel challenge, 5 targets and hitting them in a particular order, and just working on transitions. And I worked on reloads. I really don't I don't do handgun very much at all. I love handgun. My dad's probably rolling over in his grave right now. I mean, he shot a handgun competitively for nearly 20 years.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I know, right? But I just don't really do handgun very much, partially because of the restrictions that we have around handguns. It's harder. If I want to go practice my rifle, I can throw it in the trunk of the car, lock it up. I can go to work, and then I can just run out to the range, do my hour of drills, and then come back to work. With the restrictions with handgun, I can't do that. I have to, put it in its lock case, put it into the trunk, drive directly out to the range, do my drills, drive directly back home, and then put it back in the safe, and then go to work. So it's a lot harder to do, and I think it probably plays a pretty big part in why I don't do it as much. If we were Americans, I imagine I would probably shoot handgun more. But I got
to shoot it in the air if you're an American.
Yeah, you don't even need to be at a gun range.
Yeah, exactly.
All you need to do is just go to like Detroit, and you can shoot your gun at wherever you want, at whoever you want.
Or the Chaz, Yeah.
More on that in the news. But so then the second 2 times I got out was with the rifle, practicing Project Maple Seed stuff. It's that season we're about to go out, and I can't very well pretend that I'm working on becoming an instructor for them if I'm not also practicing the skills that I'm supposed to be teaching to other people. So twice this week I got out to do that, so it worked pretty good. Other than that, it was just the usual stuff, just work stuff that nobody cares about listening to.
That's totally fair. Well, I did. Obviously, I trained in both Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. BJJ, I got to actually roll this week as well, a lot more than I had been. I've been keeping really active while I was teaching with a lot of solo drills, and I had some opportunities to actually roll, but I got to roll with some more another blue belt, and really got to go through it, and it was funny because, like you were mentioning, I found that I'm doing stuff and I'm rolling, and then but you're catching yourself like, I forgot that part, or I could have got it there, or your brain's just not. It is, yeah. It's just like your brain's just not quite. Your body's doing like, it's almost like the body didn't care. The mind was like, I got to catch up here, right? Yeah. So it was good. It was really good. I got a really good workout in. Obviously, Muay Thai, trained a lot. We're having more people come back, I'm finding, so we're doing a lot more pad work and a lot more active sparring, active training. We're not quite sparring yet, due to restrictions and all of that, but it was really good. And also, I had to do a lot of shopping this week. It was weird. I went to the grocery store, and I wanted to kind of comment on the strange mask culture that I was seeing. It's so weird. Like so back in March when the pandemic hit in April, or actually, I'll take this all the way back. So in February, at the end of January, I started calling it. I said, "There's a pandemic coming. Everybody needs to get ready." And my wife and I, we have a safe word, not in the bedroom, but we have a safe word when I'm getting a little too paranoid about, prepping and getting ready and being like, end is nigh, right? So, so towards the end of January, she's like,
Apple?
Look, what's that?
Safe word, apples?
No, it's actually banana cream pie, but
so it's a version of Android.
Right, exactly. So she's like, banana cream pie, dude, banana cream pie. I'm like, no, you listen here.
The end is coming, I tell you.
I tell you.
Having a safe word, if when she tells you the safe word, you say, fuck that. Oh, I swear. Damn it.
Oh, right there. But yeah, no, so I was like, no, we need to get stuff. So when everybody was out running around getting their toilet paper and all that, I was like a whole month ahead of everybody, right? And same with masks. I actually had a friend of mine who's a tailor, and I had her make us some masks for myself, my daughter, my wife. My wife's like, "You're nuts." Everybody's like, "You're crazy. Nobody's going to need to wear masks. This is not going to be a problem. There's no pandemic." And we actually were out in Ontario, and I brought them with me while we were there. I didn't wear them when I was there, but I did. I had them with me. And I'm like, man, I don't know, man, because if we get an order or something, I'm going to have a mask. All you freaking people get to stay here, and I'm going to get to fly home because I've got a mask. Anyway, so So then, during March and April, I was wearing my mask when I would go out in public, this, that, whatnot. So
Were you?
now there's almost, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I get out into now I'm not wearing a mask when I'm going out because there's like 10 cases, right? I
Well,
kind of stopped wearing my.
first of all, your beard really
Well, that ain't
reduces the effectiveness of a mask. Second of all you have to do is this,
And I'm
and
good to go.
it acts as an effective filtration system on its own.
The mask that I usually wear is it's actually it's like a full dust thing right here all the way down. So it's yeah. So but the point of the matter that I'm getting at is that all these goddamn people, I literally was standing in line, like, so we're talking like everything shut down and I had to go to the pharmacy, right? So I put my mask on, I got gloves on, the whole thing. I'm standing outside with my mask on, socially distanced from everybody, and I'm standing there waiting. And this woman was snapping pictures of me standing in line because she's like, "Oh, crazy dude wearing a mask," right? Like
Okay.
you could, right?
When is this?
This is back in March, right? Like
Oh
when the
man, you were one of the early crazy dudes in a mask.
Absolutely, I was. Absolutely.
I made fun of those people.
I know you did, but. So this is what I'm getting to here is the best part of this is I go out to the store now this week and everybody's wearing a goddamn mask when there's 10 fucking cases. Pardon me. When there's 10 freaking cases. And I'm like, oh, so I was the crazy a-hole 4 or 5 months ago when there was hundreds of cases and we didn't know what the pandemic was going to do. And so now so what I'm getting at with this whole mask culture is
what you're saying is that, like Vincent van Gogh, you're ahead of your time.
I'm never wrong about this stuff.
Please don't cut your ear off.
But it's funny now because it's almost like people are wearing masks because they didn't wear masks before and now they're like, oh, well, now I need to wear a mask. It's like it's
the same as carbon tax. Like you can make up for it. You can make up for that. Like, yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, you don't need to wear your mask now, guys. It's almost over, or at least the first wave or whatever.
In this friggin' province, there's not much to worry about right now.
There's not much to worry about. Well, in the States, they've got their issues in the snap, but so there's so many more people wearing masks now than there ever has been, and yet the numbers are lower.
And why do you think that is?
I think I think people are starting to virtue signal. I think it's a way for people publicly to say, I am a good citizen. I wear my mask so that I do not infect anybody. Look upon me for my wonderfulness. Look how magnanimous I am now. And I think that's what people are not everybody, of course. I think because now there's a recommendation, but I think there's this sense of like, I'm a little bit better than you for wearing a mask now.
Well, I think you're partially right about that. I think that's definitely a component to it. But there was such a huge social pressure campaign to wear masks, and to the point that like you got like Anthony Fauci. Is it Anthony Fauci?
Yeah. Now there is. Now there's but not back then.
No, not back then. Not when you were setting trends.
Well, yeah, because I actually was like, oh.
But like anybody who thinks that Anthony Fauci thinks that you actually should be wearing a mask, like, come on, like he doesn't think you should be wearing a mask. He literally came out and said that it's for optics.
He totally said it. He said, yeah, it was optics, but he used a different word. He said,
yeah, I can't remember exactly.
It was something like peace of mind or whatnot.
But you literally had these, the huge floating around social media about the stupid little memes where, without a mask, 95%. One person has a mask, 50%. Both people have a mask. Next to no percent. Don't be an asshole. Wear a mask. That's a huge social pressure campaign that I think was very successful.
Oh, I fundamentally
despite the fact that there are apparently studies that have been being done and repeated for decades, showing that there is next to no difference in any form of viral transmission.
Yeah, well,
and the science isn't settled. So if you want to wear a mask, then wear a mask. Yeah. I'm only rallying against the social pressure of telling other people what to do.
Yeah. And I do want to caveat it. I actually genuinely think that folks that work in a retail environment should always wear a mask. Part of my job requires me to be in a retail environment, and I wear my mask every time I'm on the floor because there's large groups of people and you just don't know.
Well, in this environment, you should do it for the optics, if no other reason.
Well,
because you're running a business.
Uh, yeah, but I do think that there's a much higher risk in a retail environment. When we're talking about like the gym, and it's a lot smaller people, or there's a tighter knit community. Restaurants, some of that I'm like, eh. And when you're out freaking shopping, you don't need your damn mask. There's 10 freaking cases. It was just, I just wanted to let everybody know that I was,
now, by the way, there's 13
right
in our city now. Yeah.
Basically, why I brought this up is I wanted everybody to know that I was right. You were all wrong, and now you've reversed it all in your mind. Stop it. So.
Y'all are backwards.
Y'all are backwards, right? So what's going on here in the world news?
Let's talk about the news. So first of all, is our firearm update. First of all, the JCCF backs the CCFR in a lawsuit. So the JCCF is I'm going to butcher it. So I'm going to look it up so that I don't butcher it. The name of the organization is the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They're essentially a watchdog organization that fights for charter rights in Canada. So they have applied for intervener status on the CCFR's behalf in their lawsuit against the government for the order in council on May 1st that potentially broke the charter, violated the charter when they've banned a whole bunch of guns. Previously, a couple of weeks ago, we talked to you about the Coalition for Gun Control led by Wendy Cukier, who had applied for intervener status against the CCFR. Well, she's also in the news again because she is now petitioning the courts. There are currently 4 lawsuits going on. The CCFR is only one of those lawsuits. It's not just the CCFR. It's the CCFR, a couple of high-profile individuals in the gun organizations or in the gun industry, and a couple of businesses in the gun industry. And but they're only one lawsuit. There are 3 other lawsuits. And so Wendy Cukier is petitioning the government to have all 4 of those lawsuits dumped into one lawsuit because she knows that there's a good case, and she knows that if any of these 4 lawsuits win, that the face of gun ownership is going to change in this country in a hurry. So she is worried, obviously, and she's doing everything she can to limit the scope of these lawsuits. So she's trying to have them all lumped into one. I don't think she'll be successful at that. I think she's going to be successful in her intervener status in the lawsuits that she applies for intervener status, but I don't think she's going to be successful getting them all in one. And there's another organization that is not a gun organization that is entering on the CCFR's behalf as well. So also Victoria Man, in the news, Florida Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have Victoria Man now.
Yeah, exactly. It's Victoria Man now. So Victoria Man points illegal military style full semi-automatic 30 clipazines per squeeze assault ghost gun AK-47 M4 Crossman BB gun. Yep, that's right. Gun. A guy pointed a Crossman. The Crossman is a brand of BB gun manufacturer, probably one of the, if not the most popular BB gun manufacturer. He pointed a BB gun that happened to resemble a AR-15 M4 sort of thing at a guy, and that person reported that the person pointed an AK-47 at them.
Yeah.
Doesn't even resemble an AK-47. So this is reported by the news. The police release it as a bulletin. Right. And the police report it as an AK-47. Then further down in their bulletin, they note that the police officers who were on scene said that it was more like an M4.
Right.
And then at the end of things, you find out it was a Crossman BB gun. Jesus. So we have now escalated to the point where not only do we call, BB guns and paintball guns firearms, and this, by the way, this gets logged as a crime involving a firearm. Just so you're aware of that. That's how it's logged in this country. Because it was used to resemble a firearm, it is now a firearm, statistically and legally. But now we can't even, like, people know so little about these things that M4s now look like AK-47s.
Right. Like that.
Tell the Russians that.
Exactly. Well, and this is I think one of the fundamental things. And I was as I read the story,
I was so pissed.
As I was reading the story, I started questioning or asking myself, like, have we or have they? And I hate the proverbial royal they. Have they polluted the conversation around guns so much that somebody's reporting an AK-47?
That's a BB gun.
As a BB gun,
like, it doesn't actually it resembles kind of like an M4, but it doesn't really look like an M4, and definitely not an AK-47.
Right. And so I think now it's like they've really just changed this narrative that all sorts of black guns, long black guns, are AK-47s and AR-15s, and because they've done this, it's completely muddy the conversation, right? It's like when you're trying to explain to somebody the difference between like a semi-automatic rifle and a single shot. Well, as soon as you say semi-automatic, the person thinks it's like a something that a battle rifle that a military personnel is carrying. Like these are not equivalent things, right?
Well, especially not friggin' BB guns.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the most obvious thing is, first of all, the AR-15 has the dust cover that closes over top of where the bolt reciprocates and ejects the shells, right? So in this BB gun, it has a mock dust cover that's closed. And then directly behind that is the ejection port, where the bolt cycles and where you charge the bolt to fire your BBs. So like one cursory glance and you can tell this is not a real firearm. But anyway, what else is going on? Five Guys Burgers. So
Five Guys, yeah. So
so Five Guys Burger employees. This was, I forget where this was, but it was somewhere in the States, but it doesn't really matter.
It's Alabama.
It was Alabama. They were fired for refusing to serve police officers. Apparently, there was a group of 6 or 7 employees at a Five Guys who flat out refused to serve the pigs. And so now they've been fired for that. And that's all I got to say about that. Like, it's getting ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
And you know what? The cops absolutely did the right thing. They were like, oh, okay, you're a fucking crazy person. Oh, I swore again. Damn it. You're a crazy person. That's okay. We'll go eat somewhere else. Like, they absolutely did the right thing, but I'm glad these guys got fired because they're morons.
Well, and I think and that's really what I wanted to touch on really quickly. It's just the fact of, like, you can have your political beliefs, sure, and I support everybody's right, but like, just serve the goddamn burger. Plus, it's Five Guys. Like, that's good shit. Like, you shouldn't.
Yeah, I'm so upset. Right? Like, where were they going to go eat? Like,
well, I know. If you wanted Five Guys, you don't get Five Guys. Like, man.
Yeah. Like, how about those fries, man?
That's right. So next up is speaking of crimes against humanity, we've got China has adopted its strictest ever virus measures against Hong Kong. So it's interesting that the Chinese government, so in a really, really quick nutshell, I don't know if people have been following what's been going on in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong, up until 1999 was a British colony. In 99, it reverted back to China. At the time, China really didn't have enough power to say, we're going to take Hong Kong and turn it communist. So there was this two systems, one of them returning the colony back.
Yeah.
That's right. So they have a two systems, one country. Basically, Hong Kong is, for lack of a better term, a democracy. And anyway,
it's supposed to be self-governing, even though it is Chinese.
Even though it is still China. And so over this time, or over the past 20 years since this happened, Hong Kong's independence has been slowly eroded by the Chinese government because, as most people may or may not know, Hong Kong is a financial powerhouse, right? And so China would love to actually have their proverbial clause in it. Anyway, so they've been trying to pass all these different laws, and I'm not going to get into it, but basically there was a security law that they were trying to pass that would allow China to treat all Hong Kong citizens the way they're able to treat other Chinese citizens. That they can't say anything bad about the communist government. They can't say anything
all
bad
the
about
usual
the party.
shit.
All the usual shit, right? And so there's been protests going on for months in Hong Kong, right? And the Chinese government has just been brutalizing the protesters, and the protesters have been fighting back. So this law,
Just so
the
you're
security
aware,
law,
like a part of how one of the things that came out of this in the early days was a video of a police officer on a bike who turned his back on a protester, and as soon as he did, the protester squirted a bottle of Roncinol onto his back and lit him on fire.
yeah, like
This is
they
what's
were,
like it's the same as what's going on in Seattle and Minneapolis and that sort of thing. Like
yeah,
there's legitimate protests, and then there's
yeah.
rioting.
Yeah, and I like when it comes to the I wouldn't say necessarily the validity, because they have grievances that I
Sure, yeah,
absolutely agree with, and how people act. Well, I don't want to get into that,
sure.
but Hong Kong in and of itself is. I think was a great way for I think it should have stayed the way it was, right? And so now the security law got passed, and the Chinese government is like, oh, COVID, and they basically have locked the entire city down. So there are protesters and there are activists who were trying to fight against the Chinese government, against communism specifically, that have just gone dark. So
Yeah.
the security law got passed. Their Twitter feeds and all this were active. They put in this COVID restriction, and these folks have gone dark. So, when I'm always harping on communist governments, like, say what we will about our Western democracies, the government's
We're
not going
about
to
to say a
disappear
lot a
you.
little later in the show.
Yeah, exactly. Western democracies, we've got our problems, but they're not going to disappear you overnight.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, what else? Let's disappear
Yeah,
that
so
news article.
for sure. So I don't know if you've heard about this, which is you guys know that I love crazy conspiracy theories. I don't believe in them, but I love listening to them. I love hearing them. So on our crazy end times watch, there is now the Neowise asteroid that is a sign of the apocalypse. So,
Okay, wait a minute. Is the Neowise asteroid even have a snowball's chance in hell at hitting the Earth?
This one, no, but there
Okay.
is actually an asteroid coming in September 1st that comes within 17,000 miles of the Earth. So for context, 17,000 miles
Yeah,
is
it's pretty
really
close,
goddamn close,
but it's
because the
still going to
moon
miss.
that's what NASA's saying.
So what's the deal here with Neowise then? Because I
So
haven't heard about this at all.
so the Neowise asteroid, or pardon me, comet, it's an interesting comet that was discovered really early on here. We really weren't aware of it, and Neowise is the near Earth object something something something. So basically, we have satellites. NASA has satellites, and the world has satellites that are constantly watching for near
Yeah. So
Earth
what's the
objects.
deal with this particular one though?
Well, it's fascinating. It's interesting. You can see it with the naked eye. That's basically it. But
Why is it a sign of the apocalypse?
that's because it's the comet in the sky. These lunatics.
But that was the sign of the return of the dragons, not the apocalypse.
Well, that's the four horsemen. But that's the thing, is like, these guys, they're nuts. So with everything going on in 2020, now there's an asteroid in the sky, and so they figured, oh my God, the entire world is coming to an end because of the asteroid.
Are the murder hornets going to ride the asteroid? So here's the thing. So basically, when is this thing supposed to pass by within the naked eye?
Well, it already is. It goes right until the end of July, and then it's supposed to fade away. So you can see it right in dusk or right at dawn. And there's been some really amazing pictures of it.
So basically, what you're saying is, until August 1st, don't buy any Reeboks, don't drink any Kool-Aid, don't go anywhere near where Jonestown was, and stay away from Waco, Texas. Even though that wasn't a different type of cult, but whatever.
Different kind of cult, yeah. No cults, and the end time people are nuts, but they're fun to listen to them rant.
What else is going on?
There is, sorry, I'm just trying to bring up my latest.
It's your Jason Kinney. Don't help provinces.
Oh yes, yeah. So basically, the Alberta government has been trying to create their own contact tracing app, and the federal government has come down on a variety of different corporations that have been helping. Alberta. I think Ontario's doing one as well, and it's saying no, don't help them, but you can help us. So
It's
and we'll get
telling these
into
companies not to help the Alberta government, but to help them with
that.
their app instead.
That's right, exactly. And so it's of course, right, because they want to corner the contact tracing app
Okay,
market
so there's only
where
one way
it
to settle
is.
this. Only one way to settle this. It has to be trial by combat.
Agreed.
Trudeau likes boxing. Boxing's fine. Jason Kenney, pick me. I will be your champion. I will go 15 rounds with the prime minister, and basically whoever wins that match, their side gets the corporate help with the app.
Your 15 rounds would be 15 1-second rounds is what it would have to be.
Why? Are you saying I'm out of shape?
No, I'm saying he would not last 15 seconds with you in the ring. There's no way.
No. I would make him last a lot more than that. But I'm not. I'm quite honest. I'll box the prime minister. I'm not even a boxer. But I'll box him
That's fair.
for charity.
That's
Let's do it for
totally
charity.
fair.
If not for
Let's do
the penis measuring contest on who gets the corporate help with the app. Let's just do it for charity.
Well, and I think I think he should. I think that would solve so many of our problems right now.
It would sure solve a few of mine.
One of the biggest problems that we're having is people dying from water. All right. So I have a PSA today. And what I want to talk about is
why can't they just breathe it like the rest of us?
Okay, so what's her name? Naya from Glee. She died.
Yeah.
There was and there was a 10-year-old boy in Australia who a shark came up and pulled him into the water. Right. Now, folks, I have to tell you guys this. This is my PSA. Water fucking hates you. Okay, it wants to kill you. Sorry, water wants to kill you. All right, that's its job. Its job is to suffocate you and to kill you,
and also to give you life.
And to give you life. No, that's what drinking it does. I'm saying being near water. So
hey, it may be a little bit too soon, but they drank a lot of water.
Oh my God, my PSA is don't be a hero.
Beside me, she just groaned hard at that. I'm sleeping on the couch.
Don't be a hero is what I'm trying to tell people. Like, I have a young kid, all right, and I'm a very skilled swimmer. I went through all up to my white badge and lifeguard and the whole thing. Very strong swimmer. I can swim a very long time. I can save myself. I can save other people swimming. Do you want to know what I'm going to do when I have my daughter out on a boat? I'm going to wear a life jacket, and she's going to wear a life jacket. And the reason that I need to wear
you're going to throw her to the shark to save yourself?
No, that's bears. No,
okay.
That's bears. Yeah. I'm going to wear a life jacket because even though I'm a really strong swimmer, could get tired. And this is what happened. She was trying to save her own kid, and she put him up on the boat, and she ends up getting pulled under, right? Because people think that, well, if my kid's got a life jacket, I don't need a life jacket. Just last year,
that's the actress from Glee, you mean?
That's right. Yeah. Just last summer, this happened as well here in the province, where a father got pulled under. He saved his kid, fell into the water. Kid, no life jacket. He jumped in, saved his kid. He was so tired he couldn't get out of the water. His family had to watch him drown.
Yep.
Folks, put on your damn life jackets when you're out there. You're not too cool. You're not too cool to wear a life jacket.
What's next?
All right, summer coming.
You're not too cool to wear a mask. You're not too cool to wear a life jacket.
At least a life jacket. I don't care, man.
At least a life jacket.
Put the damn life jacket on.
Right, what else is going on?
So, Cooved in Saskatchewan. This one was just the fact that we have now reported our largest. And it's so funny because I was ranting about masks and us not having any cases. We're actually just reported 56 new cases last week, and I think it was 2 days ago, reported our largest single day. But I want to caveat this.
That our largest single day was 42.
Was 42. But I want to caveat this, and this is the reason I brought this up, 42 exactly. But number one, and it's tragic that it's happening in a Hutterite community, but it is primarily in the Hutterite community. Mm-hmm. So there's that.
Two of them,
the other thing,
apparently.
Yeah. And so I wanted for people to understand that, you know, yeah, we're having these cases, but this isn't like it happened yesterday. People aren't getting sick and getting tested. So there's a delay, and people have not understood this delay. It's just like with the protesters, right? They're protesters and they have spikes in COVID cases in the United States. And they're like, well, must be the bars that opened up 2 days ago that caused that.
Yeah, no, it was the
No,
protests of
it was the
2 weeks
protest,
ago.
and it was 2 weeks ago, right? So these cases, this isn't, people are reacting like, well, we need to shut down the airport because there's 3 people who had COVID that came in on the airport. These cases came weeks ago into the province. There's a delay that people have not been able to correlate in their mind, right? And the reason that we need to understand this is that these delays that we're seeing in these numbers aren't necessarily the cause. So people are reacting to something that isn't the actual reason. And it's the mask situation again, right? Like we were just talking about. You know, people are going, well,
This just in, the public is easy to misinform.
Well, easy to misinform, and just stop. Think about it. We know that there's a 2-week delay on these numbers. So these infections are 2 weeks old now, right? So that's where I kind of want to leave it. But just, folks, just relax.
So next up, Lethbridge, the Lethbridge Police. You may remember them from such news articles such as May 4th, 2020, when they arrested a stormtrooper for walking around with a plastic blaster while advertising for a pizza joint. Well, they've made the news again. And so 2 Lethbridge police officers have been demoted for illegally surveilling the former Alberta Minister of the Environment. Now, they did not surveil the former Minister of the Environment after she was the Minister of the Environment. They illegally surveilled her while she was the Minister of Environment. And apparently the reason they illegally surveilled her is because one of the police officers overheard her at a meeting in a restaurant, I guess, talking about how she was going to have some area that was popular with ATVers and quadders redistricted as a provincial park. And therefore, you know, you wouldn't be able to drive your quad around there anymore. And apparently these guys are avid outdoorsmen and quadders. So the one cop calls up his other buddy cop, and they decide, oh, hey, we're cops. We can just dig up some trash on these people. We can do things like find an illegal reason or find a made up reason to pull them over so that we can give them tickets or maybe find something to discredit her, or, you know, any number of different things. You just lost your connection, my friend. So they surveilled her illegally. And did they get fired for illegally surveilling a politician? You know, the kind of thing that you would expect to happen in Colombia. No, they just got demoted. So cool.
That's awesome. We really are living in the, like, I jokingly say the end times, but we really are living in the friggin' end times. Like,
we are living in some pretty inconsistent times, that's for sure.
Yeah. It's so weird.
So, you know, sticking with the police, the Saskatoon City Police have got, so the defund of the police movement is huge, so much pressure.
Yeah.
I can totally understand this. The Saskatoon City Police just had their budget review, and they have had their funding increased.
Which is what police services need.
So one of the great things actually about this is not only that their funding has been increased in the face of, like, it's kind of a slap in the face to the defund the police movement, but a significant amount of the increase in funding is going towards their PACT program, which stands for Police and Crisis Team.
Yes.
So it's basically a team that pairs a police officer with a social worker. And it allows them to better respond to things like wellness checks and mental health issues and all of those sorts of things, to not only de-escalate, but also, make sure that if the crazy person runs at you with a knife, there's somebody there who can actually do something about it.
That's right.
So
Although
I
most
say,
cops with training.
well, yeah, I mean, there's still obviously that issue,
Yeah.
but I very much support the increase in their funding, especially because a significant amount of the funding is going to things like their PAC team.
Well, I agree fundamentally. Like, we need to not defund the police. We need to allocate funding to the police in the right spots, in the right ways. There are clear problems within modern policing and modern police forces. There's no two ways about it. Sure. Getting rid of the police is not the answer. The answer is actually funding them to a level that actually makes it possible. Like I've mentioned before, that we need to fund the police so that you can have officers training in close quarter combat 5 days a week.
100%.
That's what you need.
So again, sticking with the police, although we're going to move into the United States, people in Detroit rioted and again called for abolishment of the Detroit police force because they shot dead a young man who stood almost point blank in front of an officer and tried to shoot him.
Jesus.
So luckily this was caught on body cam. Dash cam and body cam. So there's even multiple angles here. So what happened was a team of officers go and arrest a youth who had a warrant, and they just kind of run on up on him real quick. They grab him. The guy's not really resisting. They put him in handcuffs. He's still just standing there. His buddy, for whatever reason, decides, there's about 5 or 6 police officers around here, but, I really don't want them to arrest my friend. So what does he do? He reaches into his pocket, he pulls out a small pistol, and at point blank range, thankfully he missed, but at point blank range, he fires it at the officer that was arresting his friend. Well, thankfully, one of the officers that was backing him up, you can see on the dash cam footage, as soon as the kid goes to reach into his pocket, that officer drew his weapon. And you can also see an angle of it from that officer's body camera. And so you're getting audio off of it. And that officer, you can hear him. The kid goes to reach into his pocket, and you hear the officer say, "What's in your pocket? Get your hands out of your pocket." And at the same time, he was drawing his weapon. And still, the kid was able to point it at the cop, get one shot off before he was able to get several shots off at the kid. And, unfortunately, he died. And he looks young. He's probably, I don't know, between 17 and 19, maybe. I don't know. So, it's unfortunate. But, I mean, how do you riot and tell the police that it's a racialized shooting and defund the police when the only reason that he was shot is because not only did he point a firearm at an officer, he shot a gun at an officer. That's why you got shot. It had nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah.
Now, George Floyd was murdered.
Absolutely, yeah.
This guy wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably it for the news. We should probably leave it there anyway. Hey, we got a great talk coming up with Dr. Jason Zorba in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are sitting here with Dr. Jason Zorba, also known as Dr. J, also known as Zorba the Greek. He is, maybe what I'll do, Jason, is I'll let you introduce yourself because you're going to do it better than I can do it anyways. But before you do, I would just like to point out that you are obviously the right person to be talking to about intellectual things because I can see the full shelf of books on stage left on your camera. So
guaranteed he's read each one 3 times
at least 3 times. He's reading 3 books right now. We just can't see it on camera. Jason, who are you and why should we care?
Well, I am, my name is Dr. Jason Zorba, although that honorific only applies when I do conferences or someone introduces me. So it always throws me off when someone says Dr. I look around, I'm like, where? Oh, right, me. I teach at the university. I am a lecturer in history and political studies, and I'm a avid politics fan, and I'm also a big believer that history and politics are like this, and that you can't understand what's happening now if you don't understand what's happened before. So when it comes to stuff that's happening now, the historical perspective provides a huge and important part to it. And also mention that I have a closet full of books on the other side that I've been pushing to get a full back bookshelf in the back, but Eleni my wife has been saying no, they got to stay in the closet. There's too many as it is.
Well, we'll check back with that when we bring you back for a second episode, maybe. Well, the next one, you won't even be able to see the light.
It'll just be the room, and it'll just be eyes sticking through. That's it.
Well, I think there's a difference between the intellectual bookshelf and the hoarder's book pile.
Yes,
it's a fine line.
Yeah. So we have brought you here. We're going to talk about politics, and specifically Canadian politics. We spoke about American politics and specifically American political history a number of episodes ago, but we seem to be having listeners in the United States and in Canada, which is fantastic. So we're gonna be focusing a lot more on Canadian politics today. We should mention, you said that you're a teacher at the university. Do you want to mention which university you're at?
Oh, yeah, University of Saskatchewan.
Of course. I mean, everything we do has the local spin, right?
That's right.
Well, let's get right into this thing. So really what we wanted to talk to you about is like not the boring politics. We want to talk about real politics and why anyone over the age of 18 certainly should care, and why anybody under the age of 18 maybe should start paying attention. So why don't we start off just by asking you this. What are the basics of understanding politics for a new voter or a previously unengaged voter who may be a little older?
So, one of the most important things, I guess I'll start off with this. Let's start off with some of the things that people don't normally understand about our political system that screws them up. So the first thing that people don't quite understand about our political system is that we are a monarchy. Now, almost everyone goes, of course I knew that. I have money. I see the Queen, da-da-da. But if you ask somebody, you say, who's the Queen? They would say, Queen Elizabeth, Queen of England. But in actual fact, she's not Queen of England to us. She's Queen of Canada. So Canada has its own separate monarchy.
And
so
she still is, like, officially, we are still a monarchy?
We are 100% a monarchy, and
Wow.
she is Queen of Canada. And in fact, we have a separate monarchy. So when we talk about Queen Elizabeth, we actually had to change our rules because prior to this, when Britain changed their rules of succession, we might have had a separate queen or a king when she passed. So we can have a separate king or queen as well. We choose to have the same queen as Britain, but she's Queen of Canada. So we are a monarch. Wow. We are a monarchy. We are a constitutional monarchy. That's the first really important thing that people they don't realize.
Okay.
The second important thing about that, and the reason I mention this, is that she does nothing actively. The monarchy does nothing actively, but passively, it's actually really important. So people go, oh, wow, why do we need a monarchy? And the answer is because it's the foundation of our entire system. It's literally, our whole house of politics is built off of the monarchy.
She's literally our head of state, right? Like
exactly. All authority flows.
So if we wanted to, for example, change things and become an actual, our own representative democracy, we would have, it's not as simple as just writing her out of the books. We would have to change the way that everything is done. Is that what you're saying?
Essentially. I mean, you could try to do it so that you wouldn't have major changes, but the reality is you'd be building a whole new foundation. Right. And there's all these things that get attached to it, and including things like what happens to the powers of the Governor General. So because the Queen is never here, the Governor General fulfills her role here, right? Julie Payette right now. And she has all these powers that she could exercise if she wants to. So you'd have to figure out that. You'd have to figure out what happens with the Indigenous treaties, which were signed with the Crown. You'd have to figure out a new source of authority in terms of, when we think about Saskatchewan, and this is going to be the next point, but when we think about Saskatchewan and the government of Canada, they are separate but equal. And one of the reasons they're separate but equal is because they both draw their authority from the same place, the Queen.
Right.
So one can't claim to be more equal than the other because they both draw their authority from the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
That's why we have a lieutenant governor in Saskatchewan and a governor general for Canada.
It's a lieutenant governor.
Oh, sorry, right, my bad.
Hey, cut him some slack. He did say Saskatchewan, not Saskatchewan.
I know. I haven't commented yet, but I just or at least I had to comment on one of the pronunciations.
In our first episode, Mark went on like a 10-minute rant about Saskatchewan and Saskatchewan. So
Well, I'm glad I got it right. Saskatchewan.
Yeah, good for you. So that's very interesting. So the provinces are separate but equal to the federal government in terms of what, when we're speaking practically?
Okay, so this is the next point. So with the first point being, there's a queen and we're a constitutional monarchy. The next point is we have a federal system. And so the federal system means that the provinces and the federal government are separate but equal. And they're separate but equal in terms of they each have certain responsibilities. So Saskatchewan's in charge of education, and the federal government can't say crap to the government of Saskatchewan about education. The Saskatchewan government could decide to rewrite our education to say in the history books that the Ottawa is a terrible cesspool and only terrible people go there, right? And there's nothing the federal government could do about it.
That'd be modern. That'd be modern history.
Or any history. And then the federal government's in charge of things like the army, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we went to war in Afghanistan, Saskatchewan didn't have a say. We couldn't go like, do we really want to be sending our troops to Afghanistan? The federal government goes, yeah, we're sending troops and there's nothing you can do about it. So within their specific areas, they are completely separate and equal to each other. The federal government cannot overstep and the provinces can't overstep.
Mm-hmm.
Really? So actually, this is interesting then. So this is exactly how this happened when Prime Minister Trudeau said that he was going to pass legislation to allow municipalities to pass handgun bans. The government of Saskatchewan said, oh, no, you're not. They're under our purview. And they passed a law banning municipalities from issuing handgun bans. And I'm assuming exactly what you're talking about is just a couple of weeks old example of that in play.
Exactly. The municipalities are directly under the provincial governments. So when we think about three levels of government, people often go, oh yeah, the cities are a separate level. Mm-hmm. The cities actually only exist because the provinces will them to exist.
Allow them, right? There's
exactly.
It's a Municipalities Act, and as far as I understand, and it's even in some provinces, correct me if I'm wrong, like Halifax, for example, isn't even actually a city. It's just a municipality. Like it's not really? Even, as far as I've always understood it.
Yeah, so, and you have different, exactly as Mark said, and every province will have its own rules about municipalities. Mm-hmm. And the government of Saskatchewan, for instance, could quite literally disband the government of Saskatoon. They could get rid of the mayor and council. They could just be like, yeah, you're gone. And there's nothing you could do. All power in the cities flows from the provinces.
Well, that settles it then. I don't want to be prime minister. I just want to be premier.
Well, remember though, the prime minister has more money and therefore more ability to sprinkle money. And this is how the provinces this is how the federal government influences the provinces. So healthcare is a provincial responsibility, but the federal government provides billions of dollars and says, if you want our billions of dollars, you have to do this, this, and this.
Right. So as usual, there's a difference between the letter of things and the spirit of things, and everybody still needs to cooperate and get along, which is probably why most of the time provinces are following the lead of the federal government, I would imagine.
Yeah, because there's the federal government, especially the smaller provinces, right? Now, if you're Ontario or Quebec is a great example of this. They can just go, yeah, no, we're going our own way here. We're going our own way here. There's a, Mark, you've probably even seen it. There's a petition going around now to try and create more powers for Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's...
Are you talking about the Buffalo Declaration or something different?
Yes, that's the Buffalo Declaration.
Well, just for our viewers who don't know what that is, that's basically it was started by a number of Alberta members of parliament. And the Buffalo Declaration is basically saying that originally the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan were supposed to be a single province named Buffalo. And in order to consolidate power in the East, MacDonald, prime minister at the time, basically divided the geographical region into two separate provinces to prevent a consolidation of power in the West. And now this new Buffalo Declaration is basically saying this is the way that it was supposed to be originally, and we now want it to go back that way. We want more power equity between the West and the East. Am I summing up the Declaration?
Pretty good. It was Laurier in 1905 who refused to create the Buffalo province. But the bigger thing is, in terms of our discussion about the federal provincial things, is our powers is simply that they want to reassert some of the provincial prerogatives that the provinces have essentially said, okay, Ottawa, you should take care of that, right? And they're going, no. For example, we could have our own police force.
Yes, that's why there's no OPP in Ontario.
Exactly. The Cité de Quebec in Quebec, right? The SQ. We could do that, right? We could create our own pension plan. We could do all of these things. We choose not to. And so the Buffalo Declaration is about trying to saying maybe we should create. It's an offshoot of the firewall, that something that Stephen Harper had proposed back in the 90s before he was prime minister for Alberta, that they were going to build a firewall around Alberta and exercise essentially all the provincial powers and prerogatives.
I remember hearing some. I was too young to give a crap, but I remember hearing something about that. I remember hearing about Alberta firewall. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Okay, so we have a bit of a better understanding of what Canada is, and the federal government, the provincial governments. We even talked a little bit about the municipal government, so let's include them. Who are we actually voting for, municipally, provincially, and federally?
Well, this is one of the things that really trips up visitors to Canada, especially if you're an American, because the Americans have it real easy. They go one day and they vote for everything on one ballot. But in Canada, you vote for everything separately. So you have a separate election for the municipalities, you have a separate election for the provinces, and then you have another separate election for the federal government. And the overall result is oftentimes a lot of electoral fatigue, where people are like, oh, crap, I got to vote again. And also confusion. They're like, wait, didn't I just vote? And you're saying, no, that was for your MP. Well, who am I voting for now? Your MLA. What's the difference? One's in Regina, one's in Ottawa, and they control completely different aspects of your life, right? Or now you're voting for city council. Well, wait, didn't I just vote for an MLA to control stuff in Saskatchewan? Yeah, but now you have to deal with Saskatoon. So every level of our government has a completely separate election.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So now if we're voting municipally, we would vote for a specific councillor in our district of the city, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So
and mayor.
And the mayor. So now can we extrapolate that provincially? When we vote provincially, who exactly are we voting for? And like when we're making a decision, what actually happens there?
All right. So here's where that analogy, the wheels come off. Our city and council is closer to the American system insofar as you vote for the mayor separately than the city, your councillor. Right. So you're electing a mayor simultaneously as you're electing your councillor. Provincially and federally, it's the same in both. We actually don't elect the premier and we don't elect the prime minister. We elect people to literally fill the chair in Ottawa, and the party who controls the most chairs gets to decide who's the leader is. Right. Yeah. So the premier or the prime minister. Right. So you don't actually, nobody in Saskatchewan voted for Justin Trudeau. And unless you live in unless you live in Spiritwood. No. My goodness. On the way up.
Brad Wall was?
No,
we haven't voted for Scott Moe yet.
Nobody that's right. Yeah.
Nobody voted for him.
Nobody's voted for Scott Moe.
So Swift Current would have been Brad Wall. Yeah.
So Swift Current was, So I was going the right place.
Where's Trudeau's writing? I'm guessing somewhere in
Quebec.
Yeah.
Okay. Gatineau, yeah.
No surprise there.
So we don't vote for the leader, the prime minister or the premier, but in effect, de facto, we do, because by electing a liberal or conservative, you're turning your seat to that party, and that party will automatically support the leader.
Right.
So now I think this is where a lot of Canadians, I think, get confused, because when, practically speaking, when everybody talks about this, it's, well, who are you voting for? Oh, well, I'm going to vote for Trudeau, or I'm going to vote for, well, right now, Andrew Scheer, or I'm going to vote for Jagmeet Singh. But you're not, unless you live in those guys' specific ridings. So how, can you maybe go through, I think we all know how the average Canadian approaches this. They approach it as though they were voting for the prime minister. We know that we're not actually voting for the prime minister. So in your opinion, what do you think would be the best approach for the average Canadian voter to look at federal voting?
Before I answer that question, if I could just take a quick little history detour about something that's really interesting and I think important to this.
History detours, those are my favorite.
Best kind of detours.
They are the best.
our system used to work much better than this, because it used to be that the elected members, the MPs in Ottawa and the MLAs in Regina, had a lot more freedom, and they could say and have opinions, and that would allow them to properly represent us, their voters, right, their constituents. You couldn't well, you would always still crack the whip a little bit, but they had the ability to grab the whip, if you will, and whip it back.
Okay.
So
how far back are we going when we say that?
Not that far back, believe it or not, 1970s.
Really?
This concentration of power where the prime minister is so powerful, where the premier is so powerful, this all traces back to Justin's dad, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He's the one,
of course.
Yeah, he's the one that created that. So in the prime minister, I'm not sure how many people will watch The West Wing. I might be dating myself, but The West Wing. So The West Wing was a TV show about the president of the United States' staff and the stuff that he did.
The West Wing of the White House. Yeah, exactly.
In Canada, we have an equivalent to that. It's called the Prime Minister's Office, the PMO. And these are people who work directly for the prime minister. So they used to have no power at all. They essentially answered the mail and set the schedule. But starting with Trudeau, he started to staff the PMO with advisors. So that rather than, for example, going to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and say, well, what the heck do we do about Syria? He has his own advisors in the prime minister's office. So he no longer cares what the Minister of Foreign Affairs thinks. He no longer cares. He has his own. And so now the prime minister's office is staffed with all these advisors. They make the policy, and then they go out to everybody else and they go, this is what we want you to say in question period. You say this and you say this.
Right.
Is that how that works?
And a lot of, and a lot of those advisors come from corporate world or are long-term, like they've gone through multiple prime ministers. They already have their marching orders from their own political beliefs, right? Or their own political ideologies, as far as I understand it. And then they're able to carry things forward even as a prime minister leaves.
So you're making a tiny little shift, and you're talking about the Privy Council. So the Privy Council office is filled with the staffers. The PMO are people who are brought in specifically to serve that prime minister. So it's always changing. So when Justin Trudeau became became prime minister, he filled the entire PMO with loyalists to Justin. And when Stephen Harper, he did the same thing. The Privy Council, you are right though. The Privy Council, these are the people who are staff. They come from corporate, exactly as you said, right? They have their own ideas. They get cherry picked and they have their ideas of how it's supposed to work. The PMO though, it's actually scary. The top rung of the PMO is run by, usually some experienced guys, but the bottom rung of the PMO is filled with 20-year-olds. And in fact, under Stephen Harper, the PMO had so much power, and there was almost a mini revolt against this. And they used to call them the boys in short pants, because schools prep school boys wearing short pants, so they'd say the boys in short pants because they'd be 20-year-olds. Now, I know you're thinking, what the heck are 20-year-olds doing staffing the most powerful political office? Yeah. Who else would work 80 to 100 hours a week for $30,000, $40,000? Yeah,
that's right.
Well, if I could run the country behind the scenes, I might consider it.
So bringing this back, to your initial point for a little history detour. So now we have all this power concentrated in the prime minister, and that's why whatever Justin Trudeau says goes. And that's why whatever Jasmeet Singh says within his own party, it goes. Now, if you'll bear with me for like another minute here and I'll get off of this. Yeah. The whip, if you will, that enables them to do all of this is that the leaders of the parties control who can run in the ridings.
Right, yeah.
So if Justin Trudeau...
If you're going to be a lone wolf, then you just won't get to represent the party at all.
So exactly. So this literally happened with the NDP under Jasmeet Singh. There was Aaron Weir, who was a Saskatchewan MP, was accused of sexual harassment. He was essentially cleared. They did an investigation into it, and for all intents and purposes, he was the judge said, look, he doesn't read social cues very well, and he stands too close to people. But that's all there was to this.
Right.
But Weir was unrepentant and really pissed off about this and refused to go along with the rules that Jasmeet Singh set out for him. And Jasmeet Singh went, okay, cool, you're out of the party.
Right.
Done.
Yeah.
Wow.
And 70 former and existing MPs and MLAs, NDP MPs and MLAs from Saskatchewan signed an open letter to Jasmeet Singh saying, look, you really should let Weir run again. And Jasmeet Singh said, nope, you're gone. That was it.
And it was all just because he's the leader of the party. He gets to decide that.
He gets to decide.
It really sounds like our system was created to be a bit more, A, representative of the people, and B, to allow a little bit more freedom to represent the people. But it also sounds like, somewhere along the way, maybe with Trudeau Senior, from what you're saying, somewhere along the way, we just started like cherry picking little things that were a bit more American politics, and just instituting them into our system. And it sounds a little bit like a Gong Show now. Like, am I even reading this right? Or like,
the American system is actually different because in the and this is the counterpoint to our system. So many people, when you hear this, you go, well, it's easy. Just let the democracy breathe. Just let the MPs do whatever they want. The problem is then we had this in Saskatchewan. We had the Reform Party in the 1990s, and they elected a few MPs, and they believed this. They said, let everyone say what they want to say. And they elected a few MPs who had some beliefs that were far out. Yeah, far. Let's just charitably call them far outside the norm.
Right.
This was Stockwell Day, right?
Well, but it wasn't Stockwell Day I'm talking about. He was
the leader of the Reform Party, right? I'm just trying to remember back to the 90s now. If I've got the, is it?
Okay, well, let me give you an example. In the 1990s, there was an MP, an elected Reform MP from Saskatchewan, I forget the exact riding, who publicly claimed that gym class was a homosexual conspiracy to recruit boys. Okay, and now this is, you could go and check this out. Like, this is not conspiracy. Like, he said this on the record. This was public. Like, he was like, "Yeah, no, gym class, right? Gym class is a homosexual." And so today that wouldn't happen because the leader would be like, "Yeah, you're not in the party." Right. Yeah. So the flip side of allowing more freedom is Donald Trump. Right. Is you have the Tea Party.
There's more freedom to elect wackadoodles.
And sorry, I do want to touch on this really quick. Actually, I think you and I have had this conversation before, and I think it's an important point to make about our system. Well, sure, it allows more freedom, but there's actually, because of the amount of parties we have and the way our party structure works, fewer people actually end up voting for the party, thus the leader. So like in the United States, you get a 50-50 shot, Republican, Democrat, right? In Canada, we have, 4 parties, right, when you start getting into it. So now you're talking, even if you split it 25%, only 25% of the people would, if it was broken out evenly, even voted for that party. So you're talking like even 30% of the country is voting for what is essentially the leader of the entire party. So when people say that our democracy, we're far more democratic than Americans, that's not really the case, right? We actually have a system that far fewer people are making the decision. And then now, to your point, even smaller groups of people are now making these decisions. So it's, for lack of a better term, it's an oligarchy.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's an oligarchy quite
Fair
that
enough.
bad yet, but I certainly would say that, I mean, everything you said is exactly right. Justin Trudeau won the 2015 election and became with a majority government with less than 40% of the vote.
Right.
Or was 40% right on. I think it was something to that range. Jean Chrétien won 3 consecutive elections in the 1990s and never cracked 40%.
Right.
So
only half of the population votes.
Exactly.
Right?
Only, you have a voting. I think in the last one we had 62 or something to this effect. But your point is exactly right. Like,
not after this episode, we're going to crack 80%.
Well, and a lot of this. So as Mark said. So you have half the people not voting roughly, and then of those people voting, only 40% elect essentially the prime minister, and that 40% empowers the prime minister to have more power than any other elected representative in the entire world.
So wait a second. When an internet troll says the majority of Canadians voted for him, he can do whatever he wants, they're not right?
No, they are in fact wrong. We have not. Here's your best response to that. We have not voted for our prime minister to the tune of more than 50% of the actual people who voted since 1984.
Really? And
so
and
if
now
you said
84, that was
Brian Mulroney,
that was when Mulroney took over after Trudeau, right?
after Trudeau Senior, yeah.
Yeah.
Technically, it was John Turner who was in there for a couple of months, but yeah, Turner
We don't
was.
count those guys, though.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been, if you were to say the majority of Canadians voted for the prime minister, that would only be true in 1984. You have to go all the way that far back.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then I
A
imagine
plurality voted for Justin Trudeau. In other words, out of all the people, he got the most votes, but he didn't get a majority of the votes.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that
Yeah,
interesting?
you start adding those. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway,
So we've been talking a lot about we started off by talking about how technically Canada is still a monarchy, but we obviously have a democracy of sorts in Canada. So what sort of democracy exists in Canada, and what defines our style of democracy?
So we have a parliamentary democracy. And not to go too far into political science, but basically there are three main kinds of political systems in the world. You have your presidential system like the States, semi-presidential, where you'll have like in France, and this is the one that confuses everybody, they have a prime minister and a president. Mm-hmm. And people are like, wait a minute, I thought you could only have one. No, you can have both. It's semi-presidential, and then you have a parliamentary. So we have a parliamentary democracy. In a parliamentary democracy, the big thing, and most countries that have this, and we specifically have a Westminster parliamentary democracy, which means we borrow it from Britain. So our parliamentary democracy comes from Britain. Now, what all this means is our executive, our prime minister, is fused. Think of it like like a centaur or a Pegasus or what have you. It's fused with the legislature. So Justin Trudeau sits in the House of Commons, and so does all of his cabinet. Right. Now, you contrast this with the United States, where Trump and none of his cabinet can come from Congress. Right. So our system is we elect people to go into Parliament, and then Parliament decides who's going to be the prime minister, and cabinet, which runs the government, is chosen from Parliament. So all the power rests in Parliament. Okay. Everything is concentrated in Parliament.
So essentially what we're talking about here is a democracy where the people elect the representatives of Parliament, and then the prime minister, I guess everybody who represents in Parliament is a member of Parliament, and then the cabinet is formed from that. Yeah. Correct? And that's where all of our ministers come from. And then the head of the ruling party becomes the prime minister, who gets all of the love and the glory and the hate. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Fair to say? Okay. So as far as the voter goes, the voter is voting for a representative within Parliament, and as we mentioned before, not the actual, let's call it the ruler of the country, the leader of the country. So does that mean then, and I'm asking this as a devil's advocate question, because I think most of us will already know the answer, but does that mean then that once elected, that the prime minister and his cabinet can do whatever they want because we voted for them, and that's where the democratic process ends?
So yes and no. Once elected, there are very few checks on the prime minister's power, but this is not to say that they can do whatever they want, right? Because they are limited by things like the Constitution, the Supreme Court, the separation of powers, right? So Justin Trudeau can't come in and say to Saskatchewan, we want your education system to be like this. Right. He can't come in and say, we want your healthcare system to go like this. He doesn't have that power, right? He also can't pass laws that violate the Constitution. Now, there's a notwithstanding clause, we can get into that, but that's another constraint on him. When, for example, Stephen Harper passed a law that said that First Nations had to make public all of their financial documents, essentially. Mm-hmm. And they went to the Supreme Court and they said he doesn't have the power to do that. And the Supreme Court said, you're right, he doesn't have that power, and that law got struck down. So it's better to say that within the laws and powers that he does have, if he gets elected with a majority government, then he can do whatever he wants in that box.
Because he will have the parliamentary support as a majority government.
Exactly. If he has a minority government, exactly.
Right.
With a minority government, though, the other parties can boot him out, and that makes it a lot less stable.
Well, unless there's a pandemic named COVID-19, apparently.
And or the other parties decide to, vote in favor of giving him essentially, this was not to get again too political, but this was one of my. I was really disappointed with Jasmeet Singh and the NDP for supporting the essentially elimination of Parliament through the summer.
Right.
I thought it wasn't a very good move from a political standpoint, from a sort of like how our system works. But I also thought it was a dumb move from a purely politics standpoint, because Parliament's where you get to grill the government, right? It's where Parliament is where you get to sit there and go, you did this wrong, and you take that away.
He's literally given up his own voice.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not that they've been exercising their voice very much in the last number of years anyway.
Well, it's always hard, especially in a pandemic, but hard doesn't mean impossible. And certainly if we look at the we controversy that's going on right now, this would be if Parliament was meeting, they would be making a meal out of this, right? The Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc would be going, and you would see it, right? The sound bites. And this is why it's important to have good people elected, right? This is why it matters to have the MPs. Even though they don't have that much power, a good MP will try to hold the government to account, or if they're in government, will hopefully do a good job, right? And that matters.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, fantastic. Jason, I forgot what our next question is, and I'm just completely.
So I think one of the questions I would like to try to understand, and we've heard a lot about the Order in Council. Could you try to explain to us, like, what is an Order in Council? Like, what exactly?
Just before you answer that, let me explain it just for voters who don't know what's going on yet, and maybe even some of the American listeners that we've picked up have no idea what this is. So, an Order in Council. I'm assuming you're talking about the May 1st order.
Yes, well,
obviously not,
but the grander, but
so we want you to touch on what an Order in Council is, first of all, and second of all, we know that on May 1st, an Order in Council was put in place to change the status from non-restricted and restricted of certain firearms or types of firearms to the prohibited category, and that's something that normally would go through Parliament, but Parliament isn't sitting, and so it was done through an Order in Council. And we were talking about it in the news earlier, there are 4 lawsuits currently against the federal government for that Order in Council for essentially charter violations. So to recap, what is an Order in Council? What the hell gives them the right? And does it, obviously this would be just opinion, but based on what you know of the process, does it sound like the May 1st Order in Council is above board and or legal? Not that I'm asking for legal opinion here now. But.
So unpacking all of this, and understand too that now we're getting into parliamentary procedure, and so these sort of things I'm not as 100% solid. So just it is entirely possible I may mischaracterize this, and if so, I apologize. An Order in Council essentially is the government passing a law without passing the law through Parliament. And the reason that these exist is sometimes things have to happen quickly. Sometimes Parliament isn't meeting. Sometimes Parliament doesn't need to meet for this. Generally speaking, orders and councils, in terms of the May 1st Order in Council with the gun, the reality is that the fact that it's an Order in Council is largely irrelevant. If it came before the House, they would vote for it, and it's going to go pass regardless. So the fact that they use an Order in Council instead of just putting it through Parliament really doesn't change the nature of what happened, right? If you were to sue and say they can't do this as an Order in Council, and I'm pretty sure they can, but say you did win that and they had to go back to Parliament, there's a really good chance that the NDP and the Bloc support the motion and the law passes, and you're back at the exact square one, right? So if someone doesn't, if you think of it like this too, an Order in Council if the government of the day has a majority government and they want to pass it through Parliament, it passes through Parliament automatically because they force everyone to vote for it.
Mhm.
If they don't have a majority government, if they have a minority government and the government passes an order in council and the other parties don't like it, they can get together and pass a law that invalidates the order in council or even turf the government out.
Right.
Right.
So the whole order in council versus Parliament part is a
it's a red herring almost. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't really change the nature of the legislation.
Fair.
And the other part, so the question about the charter, it'll be interesting to see whether or not a charter challenge is sustainable. You guys know this better than I do. So, I mean, I'll speak to what would happen if it was or if it wasn't. So if the Supreme Court rules in favor, then the law stays. If they rule against it, then the law gets thrown out. But they still have the option of using the notwithstanding clause to bring it in.
Right.
Now,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. So I'll say one thing and then I'll just backtrack for a second. So the reality is that they could use a notwithstanding clause. They won't because we've never used a notwithstanding clause, and it's incredibly difficult to see the Trudeau government doing that. So
as heavy-handed as the order in council was, that would be even more heavy-handed.
It would go against the Liberals because the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a Liberal document. I mean, this was really championed by the Liberals and by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I would be shocked if the first time the federal government ever used the notwithstanding clause, it was under Justin Trudeau.
Right.
That would be as authoritarian as he can be at times.
We are in 2020 land though, so who knows, right?
Like, you never know.
Yeah.
And so if I could backtrack for one quick second, one of the things that people often confuse in Canada and the United States is they have the Bill of Rights, we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Mm-hmm. They're basically the same, except that the American Bill of Rights is ironclad and there's no wiggle room. Yeah. There's no like escape clause. Whereas our Constitution comes with not one, but literally two escape clauses. Yeah. So we have the notwithstanding clause, which allows the government, federal or provincial, to invalidate part of the Constitution that they don't like. Not everything, right? They can't, for example, they can't pass a law and say, we're going to arrest Mark because we don't like Superman hats, right? He could sue and they can't use the notwithstanding clause to get rid of that. Yeah. But in Quebec, they can use the notwithstanding clause to say that you can't wear a hijab and work for the Quebec government.
That's what they use.
Right.
So they can. It's unconstitutional. That laws, not separation law, the secularization law is completely unconstitutional. But they can use the charter, the notwithstanding clause to get out. And the other escape clause is at the very beginning of the charter. It says all of these rights are guaranteed except unless the government needs. Can prove that it's important that the government not follow the charter.
That's the Section 1 fundamental in accordance with fundamental justice or something like that.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So we have, and now I would make the case that in fact this is one of the strengths of our Constitution, because I'm a big, and this is a personal belief, but I'm a big believer that government works best when there are checks and power is a little bit more diffused. And the Americans have their Bill of Rights, and it's lock solid, and there's just nothing you can do about it. Whereas with ours, if a judge were to make a ruling and everybody went, "Whoa, what are they thinking?" You can use a notwithstanding clause, right? Yeah. And let me give you one quick example that happened here in Saskatchewan, where our two school boards, for those of people who are watching who don't know, we have a public and we have a Catholic school board in Saskatchewan, and the public school board sued the Catholic school board. So if you're keeping score at home, both are government agencies and they sued each other. One sued the other one.
Wait a minute, using whose money?
Using all of our money.
Yeah.
Right, because
even those of us who don't have children but pay for the public system anyway.
Yeah.
We appreciate it though.
I bet you do.
Thanks for keeping our kids educated.
Way to go.
Yeah.
So here in Saskatchewan, a judge actually ruled that only Catholic kids can go to Catholic schools, which essentially reversed decades of non-Catholic kids going to Catholic schools. Yeah. So you actually have schools built anticipating 500 students, for instance, and now they're going to lose 250 students, and the school right beside them, which anticipated 700 students, is now going to have 1,000.
Right.
So the whole thing was going to and the government of Saskatchewan went, yeah, no, notwithstanding clause on that bad boy, because we're not screwing up, all the. It will cost us so much money to fix it. We have to change all the schools. Like, no.
Yeah. Exactly.
It'd basically be like getting rid of the monarchy. You have to rewrite everything.
Yeah, you have to change. Yeah, exactly. It just they was like, yeah, no, that's crazy. Just one judge can't force us to change it all. So whereas in the States, you'd be stuck.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a common expression, and I know that it's often quoted to Mark Twain, but apparently he didn't come up with it. But it's that if voting made a difference, they wouldn't allow us to do it. So, and you hear this all the time, especially in the West. Why even bother voting? The election is decided before the sun even sets on our province. And so I want you to kind of touch on that. Number one, does voting actually matter? Was Mark Twain right? I know he was American, but whatever. And second of all, is the power balance that big between the East and the West that the election is actually decided in the East before the polls even close in the West? So two-part question.
Before we go any further, I have to say that favorite Mark Twain quote, and this is for especially applicable to social media: never argue with a stupid person because they will drag you down to their level and beat you with experience.
I don't heed that advice all the time.
But anyway, so the two-part question. One, yes, vote. For the love of God, vote. It is so important that you vote. And people at West, one of the problems that we run into at West is we don't know how to vote, and we don't know what our vote does. And so we vote in a way that's often counterproductive to what would be in our best interests. Right? Let me give you an example of this. Rob Goodale was an MP in Regina. He was Ralph. I said Rob. Sorry, Ralph Goodale. Thank you. Ralph Goodale was an MP in Regina, Liberal MP, sitting in cabinet. One of the more experienced MPs in the cabinet. He had tons of experience, long time, a lot of power, a very loud voice, and he used that voice to support Saskatchewan in a lot of ways. Right. And the last election, everyone said, "Oh, we're going to send a message. We're going to get rid of Ralph and show those Liberals." Well,
because he drafted Bill C-71.
Well, for a whole bunch of reasons. You're right.
The reason I care about was C-71 anyway.
So we voted out Ralph Goodale, and now we don't have a single person from Saskatchewan in the Liberal government, which means there's not a single voice from Saskatchewan, and there's nobody fighting for Saskatchewan issues. There's nobody you could go to and say, listen, we're in Saskatchewan. I mean, remember, one of the things that happens with our MPs is they spend half of their time here in their ridings, and you can go and talk to them. People don't realize that, right? You can say, hey, what's going on? And so we voted them out. We're like, we'll send a message. And I said, yeah, we sent a message out, right? We sent a message that we don't care what happens in Ottawa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Like your shirt, right?
Yeah. Well, we literally cut our own voice out to Ottawa. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So
isn't that interesting though, that it's better to have, it almost sounds like you're saying that it's better to have a poor representative from your area than no representative at all.
It would be, I think it'd be much better to have a representative. Yeah, exactly. I think you're exactly right. Better to have, now poor is subjective.
Yeah.
Right? So Ralph Goodale wasn't, I would suggest to you, I mean, some people might disagree, but I mean, he was a very capable man. He was, compared to some of the other people that we elect in Saskatchewan as MPs, right? We have elected some people who I wouldn't trust to run a convenience store, let alone represent, 50,000 people or what have you, right? Yeah. So, would it be better to have Ralph Goodale? Sure. Does that mean we should vote Liberal? No, absolutely not. But this is one of the realities, right? And now another reality is that we in Saskatchewan, I mean, in terms of numbers, you can't get away from the fact that we have 1 million people. Alberta has, what is it, 5? Is it how many people?
No, I think it's 5 and 3.
I'll look it up, but I think it's a little more than 5.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say 6, or maybe look it up and you can tell me. So the reality is
under 5. It's only 4.3 million in Alberta as of 2019.
In Alberta, right? And you have well over 10 million in Ontario, right? Another
Right, okay.
8 or 9 million in Quebec. So when people say, well, why do they have such a big voice? Well, because there's a lot more people
Population.
there.
Yeah.
This is right.
Nearly 15 million in Ontario and 8.5 million in Quebec.
Right. So quick math, 23 million people between those two provinces. Right.
Yeah. And
now,
there's only 33 million people in the whole country.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
so
2/3 of all of our population in those two provinces.
Is right there. Now, people go, well, that's terrible. But remember, we have a federal system with a separation of powers. So we have a government that looks out for our interests here in Saskatchewan. This is government of Saskatchewan, right? And they have control over all sorts of things. Now, what we could do if we were smart is we could vote for a party that could create a coalition with other forces in Ontario and Quebec to win control, which is what happened with Stephen Harper, right?
You're talking about the PC party and what became the CPC?
Well, no, I'm talking about what Stephen Harper did in 2011. So not the mergers. So the merger happened earlier, right? Remember, after the merger, they still lost. They lost in 2004. They lost in 2006. They lost in 2008. Well, they won in 2006, but not majority. But he got his majority government in 2011 when he created a coalition. Mm-hmm. So he went, Western Canada is going to vote Conservative. Rural Ontario will vote Conservative. But urban Ontario will vote with Quebec.
Right.
And you can win an election just by urban Ontario plus Quebec. Both. Right. Yeah. So you need to chip away at that. Either win Quebec or win chunks of Quebec, or break up urban Ontario. And Harper did that by basically dividing urban Ontario into downtown core versus suburbs.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And suburbs vote differently than the urban core traditionally. We see that here in Saskatchewan.
Oh, right? Definitely.
Mayor and council, like the mayor, you see the votes go separately depending on suburbs versus. So Harper went, okay, so we need to get the suburbs in play, and if we bring the suburbs into our particular tent, we win. Yeah. Well, guess what happens? The suburbs are filled with immigrants, especially in Ontario. Tons and tons of immigrants.
Right.
So if you want to win those votes, you can't be an anti-immigration party.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He wasn't an anti-immigration party in 2011. They started to move. That one, I don't want to overstate it and say they were anti-immigration, but they started to move towards a less supportive of immigration, and that drove those voters to the Liberals.
Away. Yeah. Interesting.
And one of the reasons they did that is because the core here in the West moved the party.
Isn't that an interesting way of looking at it? I'm just realizing something right now, especially with this conservative leadership race. And I've mentioned this multiple times, that I do my best, being aware that the algorithms work towards my biases. I try to do my best to follow as many different, the way I like to put it is that I've set up my social media so that it equally confirms my biases and pisses me off every day. And one of the things I've been really watching is I've all of the 4 candidates for the conservative race, the leadership race. I've set their notifications so that I see them first on my newsfeed right now, just because it's a big thing that's going on right now. So temporarily they show up first on my newsfeed. And very recently, I've been seeing Peter MacKay put it almost, I'd have to really count them to be sure, but it seems as though he's putting up more French posts than he is English posts. And what's interesting about that is that Peter O'Toole is not putting, and he's really the guy who's giving MacKay a run for his money. He's barely putting any French posts up whatsoever. And Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan don't even speak French. So what you just said is starting to make a lot of sense to me. And it sounds like MacKay is positioning himself not only to win the conservative leadership, but already starting to pander to French-speaking Canada, kind of laying the groundwork for the next federal election as well. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. I just thought of it as soon as you were talking about, a lot of GTA will vote the way that Quebec votes, and the two of them together will win you an election. So Yes.
Yeah, well, this is if you look at the conservative leadership race, one of the realities is that so what's happened essentially, the dynamic you just described is Aaron O'Toole trying to motivate the base to win the race, and Peter MacKay thinking he's already going to win the race and he can't be painted into a corner in the next general election. So he doesn't want to go too far to the right and then lose the general election by being painted, as a anti-immigrant or anti-French, et cetera, et cetera.
Does that sound like a sound strategy, what you know of the leadership race right now?
Well, it would be if people in the leadership race, okay.
Well, do you think it is actually a foregone conclusion? Like, do you think that MacKay is going to win the leadership race?
It'll be tight. He has the best chance of defeating Justin Trudeau, in my opinion.
Oh, thank God.
Whether you like him or hate him, that's my opinion. I mean, he is.
He's got name recognition. That's a big one.
He's got name recognition. He's more likely to peel a few seats in the Maritimes than Aaron O'Toole for sure. He's softer on a number of issues that will get you into the door in suburban Ontario and in Quebec, places they need to win. So I think he has a better shot of it. Now, the thing really quickly, though, the leadership race of the Conservatives is a weird one insofar, and a lot of people don't understand how the leadership race works for the Conservatives. Okay. It's not a per vote, per person, one vote. So it's not like all the party members get one vote. If it was, then the Conservatives would be dominated by the West. Right. Instead, the Conservative leadership is decided by riding.
Right, yeah.
Just like our federal elections are.
Exactly. So every riding in Quebec, even though there are 10 times as many Conservatives in Alberta and Saskatchewan in terms of card-carrying members than in Quebec, there are more ridings in Quebec than in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Right.
So Peter MacKay is putting out friend posts because he's trying to dominate the Quebec ridings, because the way it works is every single riding will have a vote. They tally it all up, and then they give it a score. So out of 100. So if you win 56% of the vote in that riding, then you get 56 points.
Okay.
Oh yeah, okay.
And whoever gets the magic number of whatever it is, 338,000, or am I saying no? 33,800 points divided by 2. Somebody else better do the math. But whatever that magic number is,
it is,
wins.
So what's interesting about this, I was telling you guys off air that I've been pissing people off on social media over the last couple of days. This is exactly what I've been pissing people off about. It's an interesting time that we live in, 2020, everything that's going on. And like everybody listens to the podcast, and you two both know that, both the podcast and me are pretty heavily involved in firearms. And
yes.
So, of course, I belong to a lot of firearm groups on social media, and it's an interesting thing. I think it really illustrates exactly what we were talking about, that the average Canadian just doesn't even understand the political process, and that we don't even know what we're voting for, and half the time we'll vote in a way that is essentially cutting off our nose to spite our face without even realizing.
For sure, absolutely.
And I'm happy for this conversation, because it's actually confirmed to me that although I've already learned so much about our process just in the hour that we've been talking, but I'm also realizing that I know so very little about this process. But thankfully, I at least know enough that exactly what I've been telling all these people over the last couple of days is exactly what you just said. So I'm very happy about that. And I think I might post our interview on that forum and see what people have to say about it. But
but it's interesting how that upsets people, isn't it? Right?
Oh, man, it pisses them right off.
Right.
Like they get absolutely irate. In the last couple of days, I was called a libtard multiple times. And I was called a communist once. And I was told This guy just came back with a comment. It was literally nothing but political rhetoric, right? So I said, we could actually have a conversation if you weren't just talking at me like an interactive pamphlet.
Nice.
And he came back with that's impossible to do with socialist idiots like you. So I was called a socialist as well. And I think that I'm mentioning this and spending time on this because I think it's a great segue. Mark loves segues. It's a great segue into our next question, and it comes down to strategery, George W. Bush, strategics. I just made fun of George W. Bush, and then I made up my own version of the word. Strategy and ideology. And allowing strategy to guide your voting decisions as a voter, or allowing ideology to guide your decisions as a voter. And I'm wondering if you can touch on the two of those things, and are there detriments and benefits to both, or is one good, one bad? I'll stop asking question. You answer.
So, full disclosure, because I think this is important. I think I'm not sure if it was mentioned before we got on. I think we were talking afterward, before we started recording. So I'm a small C conservative, and when I say I'm a small C conservative, I'm a traditional conservative. I'm not a liberal who is a conservative as the term is used nowadays. Right? So when people say I'm a conservative today, most people think, okay, so he's a believer in small government, atomistic society, etc. That's liberal. I'm a traditional conservative in the Burkean mold. And so what that means is I believe strongly in the idea of obligation, that we have an obligation to the generations that came before us, and we have an obligation to the generations that come after us. We're not just sort of free floating ourselves. And I say all of this because as part of that obligation and that belief, I believe that politics is compromise. Right. That one of the most, and this is why I like our Constitution, is because our Constitution, to me, is a great compromise. It enshrines human rights, but it still leaves a loophole so that human rights you can't use that enshrining of human rights to go completely crazy, which could easily happen. Right. Yeah. So I believe in the politics of compromise. I think that's because essentially we are ourselves a compromise between the present, the past, and the future, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, long way of saying, I distrust ideologues. I distrust people who are welded to their ideology above all else. Right. There are other people who will tell you, well, no, it's about being true and about being, and I think there's a lot of validity to that. This is my personal opinion. In politics, the person who says no compromises ever scares me.
Absolutely.
That's just right. That's just how if someone says, well, I will never change my mind, I will never bend on this ever. And I go, well, then essentially.
Why are we having this conversation?
Yeah. Not just that, but if you're in charge, in other words, you're saying that everyone over there I'm not going to deal with them at all. Mm-hmm. So I distrust ideology. So when people say strategic voting, you notice it's a pejorative, right? It comes off negative, like, oh, you're going to strategically vote, so you're a coward. You're not going to be true to yourself. It's all about winning, right? And my response is, well, no, I have an agenda, and I'm going to try and implement that agenda the best way I can. And if that means that I'm going to vote liberal, or I'm going to vote NDP, or I'm going to vote conservative, I'll vote whichever party will help me get my agenda and the beliefs that I think should govern our country in place. And I don't think that's a sign of weakness. I don't think that makes me Machiavellian. It doesn't mean I drop my values at the door. It means I want to find a way to get my values forward. And if that means that, I'm going to vote one way, it means I'll vote one way.
Jason,
it's almost like,
go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, so it almost sounds like what's really happened now is that people have lost sight of the fact that politics is about gaining power to, further, like you say, further their agenda, further an agenda that could be good or bad or whatever for the country or for the individuals. And then people have almost like hopped onto ideology as a way to, as an identity, right? As a way to go, well, I am this thing, and thereby I'm now, Yeah, basically, like you become.
I am no
they
longer
become
an
the-
individual.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it sounds like communism to me.
Well,
Communists are ideologues, right?
Well, exactly.
Well, yeah. What I was going to say, Jason, is it almost sounds like you have, um, first of all, like developed your own ideology based on your philosophies and your outlook on life, but it sounds as though it's been done um, with your identity intact, using thought and your analysis of the world around you, and how you've come to understand it, and it almost sounds like the big difference there is that will allow you the latitude as a person to not be, how do I put this, to not be beholden to someone else's ideology. That you have your ideas for what the world is and how the world should work, and that is allows you to use how do I'm having trouble making words now, but it gives you a better freedom to be able to use the people that you need to put in place to create the reality that you would like to see in the world, rather than giving up your independent thought about the way the world should be and allowing someone else to decide it for you along some sort of imaginary constructed party line. Did I even make sense?
You did, and if I can sort of build on what you were just saying, I think unfortunately we live in a world where so many people get their information from Facebook and social media. Right. They don't turn to traditional news sources. In fact, traditional news sources have been panned now, fake news, et cetera, and they've get themselves in these little bubbles, and they've lost the capacity for independent thought. And they say, well, no, it's, there are conspiracy theorists now getting elected in the United States. There are, people committing terrible acts based off of things where you just, when you hear it, you go, how did you, a relatively intelligent person, end up embracing a belief system that is so far out of whack? It's the lack of the critical thinking. And so one of the things that I think happens voting wise is that there are people who get, whose ideology becomes such a part of their identity that when, rather than compromise with that, they'd rather vote in a way that means that they will never see the fruits of their beliefs come to fruition.
Right.
Right.
It's interesting. There was a bit of a joke going around a couple of months ago, back in May when the OIC first came out, that you are more likely now to be assaulted, physically or sexually assaulted by a member of parliament than you are being shot by an AR-15. And that was a reference to the fact that a sitting Liberal member of parliament, a couple of, not even, it was last month, I think. No, it was a couple of months ago, was charged with assault for, was it beating up his, I can't remember if he was beating up a family member or beating up his spouse or beating up a neighbor or something, but he assaulted somebody, and he's facing charges for it now. And a couple of years ago, there was a Conservative member of parliament who was charged with sexual assault. And this all has happened in the last, couple of years. And I just wonder, would people like that with those sorts of, those sorts of personalities, let's put it, would they get elected if most people didn't give up their independent thought for voting ideologically? Because it really seems like an MP, if they're backed by the right leader, they're a lock in certain areas, and the merits of that specific MP, they really don't make a difference whatsoever. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's true. I think, unfortunately, there are certain places, for example, in Ontario, where you could run, a drunken donkey and they would win, for the Liberals, for instance. And there are places here in Saskatchewan where you could run, a drunken donkey and they would win. They would win handily for the Conservatives, and that doesn't benefit anybody. right? I mean, it doesn't benefit. We have elected people because of their party and who are woefully inadequate in terms of the ability to be an MP, because it does take an ability, right? It matters. And one of the knockoff effects of this is that because our system, if we bring this back to our earlier discussion, because our system is a parliamentarian democracy, a constitutional monarchy in a parliamentarian model, the cabinet is chosen from the legislature. So the guys we elect, the men and women who we elect to the House of Commons, if their party wins control, there's a possibility they could go in cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
But because we don't elect better people, we have some absolutely terrible people in cabinet. And this has been the truth historically, going back, years now. I'll tell you a really great story. I'm not going to name any names because I'm speaking, it was told in confidence, but I knew a Saskatchewan cabinet minister a few years back. And he told me how when he became minister here in Saskatchewan, his staff, so back to Mark's point about, the staff doesn't change for the ministries, right? So his staff came to him and said, here's a bunch of binders. We want you to read this stuff. This is good stuff, just to prepare for our meeting tomorrow. So he takes the binders home and he starts reading them. And after he gets to the first few pages, every second page is blank. So he comes back to his staff and he says, yeah, every second page after the first 10 or 20 pages
Your
is
printer's
blank.
broken.
So yes, and they go, oh, our bad, here's the real ones. And he realized the reason they did that was to see if he bothered to read anything they gave him, because obviously they had a previous minister who never read anything.
Yeah.
Right? So, that's not the person you want in charge of a ministry, whether it's provincial or federal. I mean, the Ministry of Health is hugely important. The Ministry of Defense is hugely important. We need capable people. And by not electing capable people, the knockdown effect is, Justin Trudeau has essentially made Chrystia Freeland minister of everything because he doesn't have enough ministers that he can lean on where he can trust them. And Harper was the same thing. Harper had maybe half a dozen ministers who he could really trust, and then the rest of them he was like, just please don't talk.
Right.
It's like,
it's a hell of a way to consolidate power, though, isn't it?
It is.
Which lends more
unhealthy.
credibility to what you were saying before. Vote.
So
please vote. It does make a difference, if for no other reason than to put competent people as your representative in Parliament, and to get rid of the people who are voted in who aren't competent.
And also, and I think one other thing we have to mention is get involved. Not just the voting. Voting is important, but if you think that you might be interested in going into politics, but you're like, I don't know if I could, or this or that, we need good people. We need good people to vote for. Right. Yeah. So
it doesn't all just begin or end with the prime minister.
Because to Jason's point, if we can all vote, but if you've got Drunken Donkey and Drunken Donkey 2, if your choices are garbage.
Interesting choice of mammal there, Mark. You want to ask Zorba our next question?
Yeah, sure. So, should politics be a deeply personal choice that's not spoken about, or should politics be openly debated, discussed thoroughly, and considered greatly? Now, obviously, we're sitting here in a podcast literally talking about our own politics, but, but what do you think? Yeah, but what do you think? Do you think this is something? Do you think we're almost too out there about our politic now? This could be why, because the algorithm picks up on, this is where this person is. So then that algorithm is going to drive that person there. So if we maybe kept it a little bit more low key, do you think it might help?
I'm a big believer in the whole sunshine is your best disinfectant kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to be talking about politics. We need, it needs to be out there. I think the problem is, you talked about the algorithms. The problem is where people get the information from and how people talk. Right. So Chris, you had mentioned earlier how you like to fill your Facebook feed with things that drive you nuts and also things you agree with. Right. Yeah. I do the similar thing, except old school. I don't go on social media, but I subscribe to journals and magazines that take left and right views. I make a point of reading books about different viewpoints. I try to have discussions.
A much better way to do it.
Well, I try to have discussions with people who I fundamentally disagree with, but who are smarter than me. Right. And that way they make a point and I go, yeah. And I think about it, right? And what I think happens too often is rather than having discussions, we shout at each other. All right. No, you're wrong. You're a terrible person. And you can't say these kind of things. And you go, well, okay, then why not? Let's have a discussion. But you don't have these discussions on both sides. I mean, the fact that you get called, what do they call you? A libtard and a socialist?
It's called a libtard, a communist, and a socialist.
Right. Because you didn't agree or even raise the question instead of having interesting discussions. And so I think we've poisoned the well a lot in terms of how we have these discussions. And not to go off on a rant, because I understand that's Mark and your thing, but part of the problem is social media, right? It's a lot harder to scream and yell at somebody who's there face to face than it is to do it, via or even if you can see them on the screen, you still can say whatever you want because you're not there. When you're there, you're sitting down, and if your default mode is confrontation as opposed to accommodation or conversation, you're never going to learn anything.
Yeah.
Right. And you're also risking the Mike Tyson effect.
What's the Mike Tyson effect?
Well, when you're standing face to face, there's always the ever-present threat that something that you may say may cause them to punch you in the mouth.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said for, there's a guy named Robert Putnam who wrote a book called Bowling Alone, which was the decline of civil society in the States based off of bowling leagues. And his whole premise was bowling leagues were really great for politics and civil society because what do you do when you bowl? You stand up, you bowl, then you sit, and then you have to talk to these people you just met. Yeah. And that when you meet somebody and you have a conversation with them and you already have something that you're connected through, bowling, right? Or the gym, the martial arts gym where we all train together. There's a great example. I love it. I mean, one, I love it just because it's a great place, but I also love it because you go there and there are people with all sorts of different viewpoints.
Agreed.
But we're all connected. When we're rolling, we're all connected by BJJ, right? We all love Muay Thai or karate, right? And we're all connected by that love of martial arts. So automatically I'm like, I can't hate you, even though I disagree with you because we have this connection. So, all right, say some more. Let me hear what you're saying, right? And so you and it breaks you out of your bubble because you're going, well, I like this guy. We've rolled together a bunch of times, and yet he's saying something I totally disagree with. What's going on here?
Right.
And then that makes you listen. And we don't have enough of that anymore. That's my soapbox. I'll get off there.
I agree with you. More people should train martial arts.
Yeah.
That's what my big takeaway from what you said there. I may have missed a couple of the points you were making. I don't know. As soon as you said martial arts, I just started, daydreaming.
Well, and I think it is. I think it's so important that we, that people start to get out of their own bubbles, right? Like we're in a, if not now, when, I think we are at this point societally. Just look at how the United States is breaking down, Canada here with all of our problems. The fact that we have now, like we just discussed, such a small group of people making all the decisions for us, we need to start talking. It's not the best situation, I would say, and I think so. What do you think with like everything that has been going on, and especially around our topic of political. The political system. What do you think does the average person most misunderstand about Canadian politics, and what should, if people take away nothing else, what should it be from our conversation, do you think?
Ooh, if I were to say the thing that most people, politics don't matter. I think that's the single biggest takeaway is the people who think politics don't matter. It does matter. It matters enormously. And, a great example is COVID. Now, not to wade too much into the COVID debates, but if you look at Canada's numbers and then you look at the United States, you can't tell me that the politics don't matter, right? If you look at the West in terms of things like pipelines, you can't tell me the politics doesn't matter. Right. You guys are I know that involved in terms of guns and the gun ban, et cetera. And these are politics matters, right? Different government in charge means different things. And so people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. They're all crooks. Well, it does matter. It matters a lot, right? So it matters, and it matters to everybody. And quite frankly, the way if people think of it like this, if someone come up to me and said, listen, how much money do you make? And I said $1,000. And they said, okay, give me $500. My first question would be like, to do what?
Yeah.
Right. And yet we pay close to, in many cases, 50% of our income to government at various levels, municipal, federal, and provincial. And then we go, oh, who cares?
Right.
Well, it's your money.
Yeah.
You should care. You should care a lot.
And then we don't vote, and we think that it's legitimate to not be involved in the political process, and then just call them all thieves for taking all of our money out of our back pockets.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I always argue with people about the municipal elections, right? Like federal is important, provincial is important, right? But like municipal, if anything, if you're not going to vote anywhere, at least vote municipally, because then you can help with the freaking speed limits, you can help with the stop signs, you can help with the garbage collection. At the very least, like when those things are making you mad, you can at least affect change there. At the very least, you know.
Just make me premier, and I'll fix it.
You know, I got to say, to Mark's point about the municipal too, because I mean, I agree 200%. In Ontario, where I grew up in Sudbury, before I moved up to Saskatchewan 20 years ago, I didn't know that it was a thing that you could not plow the roads. Right? In Ontario, it snowed and snow plows came out immediately. And I grew up in a small town, small northern town, well, it wasn't that small, but Sudbury, which is about 90,000 people, northern Ontario mining town. And, you know, it snowed, plows came out. And when I moved out here, they're like, yeah, plows don't come out. And I said, that's funny. Like, that's like, no, seriously, plows don't come out. And if you look what happened a couple of years back, people just raised a holy hell. And they said, this is ridiculous. And the city went, okay, so let's start paying more money and we'll start and they started plowing more of the roads. Now, for my money, I will be happy to pay more taxes to get our roads actually plowed all the time, but we're better than we were before, right? And that's because people vote and government listens to voters.
They do.
So it matters. One other super fast story about this from the University of Saskatchewan. The student union will often get elected with less than 20% of the student body vote. And all they have to do to vote is log on to the computer. That's it. They don't have to go anywhere. They just log on the computer and they press a button and that's it. And 20% or less. So 80% of the people don't bother to do that. The budget for the student union is $3 million and they control over $30 million in assets. And students are like, oh, who cares?
That's your money.
Yeah, well, you pay $500 in student fees. Who do you think is in charge of those student fees? It's the student union.
Yeah.
You just gave them $500 and you don't care?
Young people don't vote. You know, like that's what it boils down to. So I think we're kind of finishing up here, and I do have a very important question. You did mention some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Do you know any other BJJ submissions that a Kimura from mount or cross side, Jay?
Well, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I am working on learning some other cross-side. You know, if people didn't offer their arm up with such regularity.
Hey, I agree. You know, keep it simple, stupid, right?
I feel like it's my God-given duty to try and help them out by saying, don't give me your arm and I won't worry you.
I love it. I love it. Still,
a follow-up question. Do you feel some sort of responsibility to teach the people that you catch in those Kimuras the defenses to those Kimuras?
What's the next question? Pass?
Wonderful.
Okay, I wanted to touch on one thing, and this is just a thought that I had. It was a definition that I came across listening to a podcast a couple of years ago when Trump was first elected, and it's something that I've thought about more and more in our Canadian political system. And so I'm going to read the definition, and then I'm going to read a quote. And again, this is another Mark Twain. I must have been on a Mark Twain kick this week, but it's another Mark Twain quote. But so the word that I would like you to comment on, and I'm going to tell you what it means in Greek, even though I probably don't need to, because you probably know more about it than I do.
You should really let the Greek say the word. But
let the guy who speaks Greek say the word.
I can't wait to hear the pronunciation, though.
I'm probably going to butcher it completely. And make sure that you are merciless if I do butcher this word. Kakistocracy.
That's actually pretty close. Well, kakos is bad. So
yeah,
I assume that's where it's from, right? Kakistocracy is from kakos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, pretty close.
So essentially what this is supposed to mean is, I suppose the literal translation would be like bad rule or bad government. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, it would be bad rule by bad people, I would assume.
Yeah, so
it's not a term I'm familiar with.
Is it
No, it's
bad or
not.
evil?
Okay.
But
Well,
does it mean bad or evil? Sorry, just for clarification, Jason. Is it?
Well, of course, means bad.
But bad as in like bad, like evil bad, or bad as in no good?
Bad as in no good.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But as is usual with supposedly intelligent English-speaking people who want to come up with fancy-looking words based on Greek or Latin, they probably just completely butchered the literal translation, anyways, with their definition. So I have two dictionary definitions of this. The first is Merriam-Webster's definition, which is government by the worst people. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as a state or society governed by its least suitable or competent citizens. And before I get your thoughts on kakistocracy, I'm going to read you the quote that goes along this from Mark Twain. Quote, sometimes I wonder whether the world is being run by smart people who are putting us on or by imbeciles who really mean it, end quote. And go.
Well, let me just say this. You get the government you vote for, right? So part of the problem is we don't have a lot of great people running. Now, two is we're really hard on our politicians. Now, there's that, and one of the problems here is, we set the bar really high, so high that almost no one can pass through it. And now there's I don't want to drag this too far out because I know you guys got other things you want to talk about, but historically speaking, another little history segue, in the United States, if we look at the presidency, the president used to be considered a figure sort of above scandal, personal scandal, right? Political scandal is one thing, but the president's personal life was nobody else's business. FDR, for instance, had a mistress of 30 years. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, mistress of 30 years. JFK very famously had a whole string of mistresses in and out of the White House. Nobody reported it. Nobody cared.
Happy birthday. Famously.
Yeah, exactly. Saying him happy birthday. Nobody reported it. Nobody cared because people went, no, not as long as whatever he's doing governing, that's what matters. The personal stuff, that's nobody's business. Mm-hmm. Then Watergate happens. Right. And then after Watergate happened, every single reporter wanted to bag the white whale, right? Because that's what happened. Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward bagged the whale. They took down a president. You can't. Mm-hmm. So now everybody wants to take down a president. So now they're starting to go through the president's stuff and they're starting to examine the president and And so the things that you could check out and examine start to become, less and less and less. Then in the 1990s, with the internet, we had the democratization of information and media. Right. Little known fact, when Bill Clinton got caught, when the Monica Lewinsky scandal exploded, the major newspapers did not print it at first. It was the Drudge Report, an internet news site that broke the story. And then once they did that, then it started going into the mainstream newspapers. And once that dam broke, mm-hmm. right, then the politician's personal life becomes free game.
Right.
So essentially and we crucify them for any mistakes. Right. Yeah. And so now you're going, okay, well, essentially the only people who can run for office are people who essentially have no skeletons in their closet at all.
Right.
Yeah. So we rake them over the coals for like, oh, you have to, well, there are very few people who meet that standard.
That's right.
And then Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, was the natural response to that, where people went, yeah,
whatever.
Who cares? Yeah. Whatever, right? As long as he is going to change things, we don't care about any of the scandals. So it went to the exact opposite extreme, where a man who would, in any previous presidential election, never even get sniffed of it, and commits a scandal that would destroy anybody else's electoral results at any point, gets elected.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas he had so many scandals that it was a interesting news week when a week went by that he didn't have a scandal.
Exactly. Right. But we have this view of politicians and one of the problems is by taking this hugely negative view of them, right, you discourage good people from running. Yeah. And the people who do run get I mean, it's a tough job. right? They get raked over the coals, and if you compromise, the ideologues on either side will attack you. So if you're a Republican or Democrat who then walks across the aisle, you could lose a primary. Here in Canada, we see the same thing, right? It's caused a lot of problems, and this is one of the reasons why we have bad people. So we have to sort of summarize it, I'd say we have two problems. One is we do have bad people, but we also have a bad perception.
Right.
All right. We crucify politicians for actions that we completely forgive sports stars for.
Right.
Or CEOs of major companies.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, you're a superstar CEO. Oh, yeah. Well, you can do this and that. A politician is like, oh. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you're saying if we do live in a kakistocracy, it is a kakistocracy of our own making. And that we have to take some responsibility for it.
That, as well as we might perceive it to be a kakistocracy when in fact it isn't.
Right, because our expectations are unrealistic.
Our expectations, we bite, right? We read the oh my God, what do you call that?
Facebook feed.
Clickbait. Yeah, the
clickbait. Yeah.
Clickbait. We do that, right? We absorb. We because we do that. That's what they put out there, and next thing you know, you're reading about this or that or this scandal or that scandal, and you're going, okay. But I guess you have to ask yourself, do you want somebody who is completely spotless and useless? Or would you want to have somebody with some skeletons in their closet who can actually make good decisions and compromises and guide the country, right? I mean, that's
the Premier of Alberta he was the Premier for so long, drank like a fish.
Ralph
Klein completely got Alberta out of debt. They didn't even have a provincial sales tax, but the man, apparently he spent, more time drunk than sober, and was just like a.
Well, you know what? You're a.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, you touched on a sore thing because I'm not a Ralph Klein fan at all.
Oh, yeah?
You got him out of debt and got him out of sales tax. The reason they're dying right now is because of Ralph Klein.
Yeah.
Because he got him out of debt and he got them rid of their sales tax. Because the way he got him out of debt was his predecessor, Peter Lockheed, had looked at all this oil wealth that Alberta had and went, what would be really smart? We should put this money aside. And he created a heritage fund. Yeah. Norway came over here and went, cool, heritage fund. That's a really good idea. Currently, Norway has a heritage fund of $1 trillion.
Yeah.
They don't spend a single penny of their oil money. It all goes into the heritage fund, and they live off of the interest of the heritage fund. Alberta had that, and then Peter Lockheed stopped being premier. Ralph Klein came on. He goes, well, "That's stupid." Spent the entire heritage fund, and then got rid of the sales tax. Mm-hmm. So they lost billions in dollars in tax revenue. Only province in Canada that doesn't have a sales tax. Alberta if Alberta had a sales tax, they would actually be in a budget surplus right now instead of a deficit.
That's right.
Yeah.
But if you suggest to an Albertan, by the way, you should have a sales tax like every other province in Canada, they would be like, well, how could you say that? That's sacrilege.
So it sounds like Ralph Klein was clearly not the best example to give.
He would be a great example of a kakistocracy.
Actually.
I think we definitely will need to bring Jason back on to delve deeper into this topic. We've obviously hit a sore spot.
Right at the end.
Right at the end. No, that's perfect. So, Jason, thank you so much for coming out, man. We really appreciate it. You have educated, re-educated, and de-educated us on so many different aspects of our political system in this country. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming out.
Especially on a Friday night when you're supposed to be with family.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you out. We'll definitely have you come back on.
Oh, no. Thank you guys for having me. I mean, I love you guys, and this is something that I always enjoy. Talking politics is not a chore for me in the slightest. So if I've helped at all, if I've given people something to think about, then I feel like I've done my job.
I believe you have done exactly that. And we definitely, I think we'll have to talk to you again in the future as well.
For sure.
I look forward to it.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Mark, that was a great talk. We really have to get Zorba on again
and
talk to him about some more stuff. But hey, it's time for Get Off My Lawn. You want to go first?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know who needs to get off my lawn? Look. Coffee is a multi-billion-dollar industry. These companies have marketing firms They have genius scientists, and they have caffeine in the damn drink, right? And I get told all the time, wow, you drink a lot of coffee. Like, okay, I get it. I've realized this, all right? And people always tell me in a slightly condescending voice too, like, you can cram it with walnuts, all right? So you know what? Right, you are all the people out there, you are all just wonderful human beings. You you can make it throughout the day without having your mind and mood altered with a stimulant. I, however, cannot. All right. And I completely understand that why I like to taste the coffee is it's actually the chemical that's messing with my brain. All right. And I understand that me flying into a pissed off rage when I don't get coffee in the morning is actually the first stages of me detoxifying. All right. And believe me, I fully understand the sacrifice that third world people in third world countries are making every day, so that me as a fat Canadian can drink way too much coffee and continue to feed my ever-growing addiction. I get all this, all right, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, out there, to all of you who act high and mighty, that don't have a legalized substance abuse problem, what you need to do is pick me up a black coffee on your way over, give it to me, and then get the hell off my lawn.
You know what you reminded me of right there?
What's that?
Dennis Leary. By the way, you're drinking coffee right now, aren't you?
Goddamn right I am.
You reminded me of Dennis Leary talking about smoking. It's a
fair
drug.
enough.
I'm addicted. Mwah, 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 mwah. That's all I can think of.
That's
when I
kind
hear
of how
coffee.
I feel about coffee. I really do. Like, just leave me alone.
So it's
about
not
it.
your fault. It's the addiction.
I'm fully addicted. 100%. 100%.
All right. Well, here we go. I'm going to rival your get off my lawn.
All right.
Karens of the world. Karen, your entitlement and constant attempts to manipulate others into getting what you want, even if your attempts are unjust, forces others to constantly be on guard lest they be professionally duped or publicly shamed by your compulsive manager-seeking tactics. You have created an environment where others are afraid to give an inch lest you dive in hair first to take a mile. You can get your hair off my lawn. If you are just named Karen, but you do not actually act like a Karen, then you may stay on my lawn, and you have my empathy for being associated with the hairstyle and the entitlement. That's all.
Excellent.
Whew,
Right on.
I feel much better.
Feel
hey, who do you want to shout out?
Well, there's actually 2 shout outs I've got today. I don't have anybody, like really close to my heart that I wanted to shout out, but I don't know if you've seen this story about the 9-year-old boy who defended his sister from a dog attack.
Yeah, man. Like his scar goes like.
I got to shout. Nuts. I got to shout that kid out, and I have to say, it really warmed my heart to see that there are still real heroes in this world. And as a 9-year-old boy, it
literally said, I just thought that if anyone should be killed, it should be me instead of his little sister.
Like, how freaking amazing is that little boy? And
literally the definition of selfless.
Absolutely. And I found out today, he actually trains in jiu-jitsu.
Yep. Yeah, apparently.
So not saying, but just saying. The other shout out is, and I rag on a lot of companies and communists because they're kind of the same. But anyway, they're not, but they're both crap. But I have to shout out a company. I absolutely love this product. It has changed my life completely and fully. I'm shouting out the makers of lock laces. Have you seen these things?
No.
Dude.
Is it Velcro?
No.
It's just Velcro?
It's better than Velcro. So what it is real quick, it's a lace. You lace your boot up with like it's almost like an elastic string, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's got this like slider lock, and then you put the lock in the lock, like your boots, like you literally could just pull the thing, it opens up, your boot slides on, and you pull it tight. Basically, it turns any pair of lace up boot or shoe into a slip on. Boom. I don't care, man. It is way better than sliced bread. And sliced bread is
what else works
more than
good?
Raw toast.
You know what else works good?
I'm not tying my shoes.
Learning how to tie a basic knot.
Hey, now that I already know how to tie a shoe. I can tie a basic knot, but this is so much faster. It's so good. You know what?
It gives you more time to drink your coffee.
It gives you. I challenge you. I challenge you. I have a second pair coming in. I was so excited about the product. It was so good. It was so amazing that I bought a second set. I'm going to give you a set to try out. And if you are
There's
not
no
100%,
I don't tie my shoelaces either. I tie my shoes loose so that I can just slip them on.
But
I wear
that's
shoes
the
so little
problem.
anyway.
No, but that's what I'm saying is that you're only wearing them loose because you don't want to tie your damn shoes.
Yeah, but
These
I
things will
don't.
let you.
No. I wear them loose because I don't like shoes. I don't like tight things on my feet. It makes me foot claustrophobic.
See, I think that
head of claustrophobic.
See, I think that that's the drug talking there, right?
What drug?
Yeah, the drug of not wanting or not wanting to tie your shoes. I'm telling you.
Here's my shout out.
Yeah.
My shout out goes to my good friends Carsey and Selena, who, as we record this, are waiting for me. That actually, I'm sure, was them. They're waiting for me to go and say hi to them. I've known them for nearly 20 years, and although we live in different provinces, we've been able to maintain a very strong friendship that continually picks up right where it left off every single time. It's been over a year since we've seen them currently, and we're going to have to end this episode so that I can go see them again. Boom.
There it is.
So that just about does it. Guys, stay tuned for the next late and great episode that's going to be coming up next week. If you would like to follow us on Facebook, it's facebook.com/DeEducated. You can go straight to our website and get everything. You can get our podcast, our videos of our podcasts. You can get our extra videos like when we blew up Canada Day, and you can get all of our blogs, both written and audio versions of our blogs. It's DeEducated.ca. You can also use your favorite podcast app to get all of the audio content, which includes our podcasts that you are either listening to or watching right now, but it also includes all of the audio versions of our blogs. We read them to you so that you don't have to read them yourself. If you would like to help support the show, you can also go to Patreon, patreon.com/DeEducated. For the moment, all of our content is being put up there, and in the future, we will have exclusive content just for our Patreons. So, guys, thanks for watching. We are looking forward to talking to everybody again next week. And in the meantime, stay cool. I don't know. I need to come up with a...
You need an ending tagline like mine. Bye.
In case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.